On April 3rd, 1903, a rider crossed the shallow ford below Andrew's cabin, and the old Crow Scout knew, before the horse even climbed the far bank, that a 14th body had been found somewhere along the river. He had watched 3 sheriffs come up that trail before this one. 2 had died in office. 1 had left for California and never written. This new man wore a black hat and a badge the sun still caught without a mark on it. Andrew was 71 years old. His hair had gone white above the ears 20 winters back, and the rest had followed, one hard season at a time. His hands were still steady. He kept them folded on his knees now, because a rider watching from a distance ought to see a man at rest, not a man reaching for anything. Beside him on the porch bench lay a ledger. It was bound in brown calfskin, worn pale at the corners, and it had traveled to 13 burial grounds in the past 25 years. 13 names lived inside it, not the names of the dead. He had never learned all of those. The names inside belonged to the ones who had done the killing. He had written the first entry in the summer of 1878. He had written the last 5 years back. The book had grown thinner in his hands over that time, not because pages had left it, but because he had. The rider let his horse pick the last stretch of trail. Andrew watched the way the man sat. Weight forward, reins loose. A rider who trusted his horse and had not yet learned to distrust anything else. He would learn. The horse stopped 10 feet from the porch. The rider touched the brim of his hat. "You're Andrew." "I am. They said in town you'd know what I came for before I finished telling you." Andrew looked past him, down the trail, toward the pale line of the river bending east. "A body," he said. The rider nodded once. "At the river bend below Crowheart. A boy from the Wilson place found him this morning. Shot twice. Nobody in town knows him. How long dead?" 3 days. Maybe 4. Coyotes have been at him." Andrew set his palm flat on the cover of the ledger. He did not open it. He did not need to. He knew what was already written, and he knew there was a 14th line waiting to be added. And he had known it before the boy from the Wilson place had ever ridden out at dawn. He stood. His knees complained. He had been standing up from that bench for 22 years, and it had gone from an easy thing to a slow thing without any single day he could point to as the change. "I'll get my saddle," he said. The rider glanced at the ledger on the bench. He did not ask about it. Sheriffs before him had not asked either. They had asked instead for names on the road home, and Andrew had given them, one at a time, and never the ones written inside the book. Andrew stepped down from the porch and paused. "Your name?" "Justin Colton. 4th sheriff of the county. 3 weeks now." Andrew stopped with his hand on the corral rail. He did not turn around. He kept his back to the young man in the black hat, and he held very still, the way a hunter holds still when he has finally recognized what he is looking at. "Colton. Number 4. He walked to the barn without another word. The ride to the river bend took the better part of 3 hours. Andrew rode a bay mare named 16, because she had been 16 years old when he bought her, and he had never gotten around to calling her anything else. She was 23 now. She walked at the pace he asked and no faster. Justin Colton rode a black gelding with a white star. He shortened his stride to match hers without being asked. Andrew noticed. It was the kind of small courtesy that told a man's upbringing before he opened his mouth. They did not speak much on the way. Andrew watched the country instead. The sage was still winter gray, but the willows along the creek bottoms had begun to redden, the way they did in the last week before the buds broke. A pair of sandhill cranes crossed high overhead, headed north. He counted them without meaning to. He had counted birds for most of his life. Once, near the top of a low rise, Justin cleared his throat. "They tell me you've done this 13 times. I have. For every sheriff before me, for the first 3. "Yes," Justin was quiet a moment. "Then, do they ever catch the ones you find?" Andrew looked at the trail between his mare's ears. Sometimes he did not say the rest. The rest was written down. They came to the riverbend a little past noon. The Wilson boy was still there, seated on a log with his hat in his hands. He was maybe 14 years old. He had been sick, and the front of his shirt showed it, and he had not moved from the log since a neighbor had ridden into town for the sheriff at dawn. Justin sent him home on the black gelding and told him to walk it slow. The boy did not argue. Andrew stepped down from 16 and tied her to a cottonwood upstream, out of sight of the body. Horses could smell death a long way. There was no need to make her stand in it. The dead man lay on his side in the gravel, 3 feet above the waterline. He was perhaps 30. Dark hair, cut short in a town barber's fashion. A wool coat of decent quality. City boots, badly scuffed now. His hands were bare, and the left one was curled loosely, as though it had once held something that had since been taken or washed away. Andrew crouched beside him and did not touch him yet. 2 shots, Justin said behind him. Back of the shoulder and the base of the skull. The shoulder first. How do you know? The blood on the gravel. He fell, then was shot again. The second man didn't want to leave him alive. Justin was silent. Andrew moved in a slow circle around the body. He read the ground the way another man might read a page. Boot prints, mostly washed. A drag mark, shallow, going up from the water. A cigarette butt, dry, tucked beneath a stone the wind would not have moved. He did not pick it up. He only noted where it lay. He stopped at the edge of the gravel bar and looked out across the river. They came in from the east, he said. 2 horses. 1 tied back. The shooter walked the last 40 yards. You can see all that? I can see enough of it. Justin came to stand beside him. He was a full head taller than Andrew and younger by nearly 40 years, and Andrew felt the weight of neither one of those things. He felt only the ledger, waiting on the porch bench, and the 4th line beneath 13 already written. They worked the ground until the light began to slant. Andrew moved slowly, because a man in a hurry misses what a man at rest sees. Justin followed a few paces behind and did not interrupt. By late afternoon, Andrew had what he needed. He crouched one more time beside the dead man's boots and studied the wear on the heels. Then he stood and dusted his palms against his trouser legs. He came up on the train, he said. 2, maybe 3 weeks passed. City walker, never rode much. The heels are new leather, worn only on the inside edge. He pinched his knees when he walked, the way a man does when he hasn't been on a horse in years. Justin frowned. That tells us who he was. It tells us what he was. Andrew turned his face east, upstream, into the wind. The other man rides a lot. Left a heel print in the mud with a nail set crooked in the shoe. That nail's been reset once by a farrier who wasn't paying attention. I've seen the same mistake come out of Bill Reeder's shop in Lander. Reeder shoes half the horses in the county, not with a crooked nail. Reeder's boys shoes with a crooked nail. Only started helping him last October. Justin looked at him for a long moment. So the killer's horse was shoed in Lander since October. Since October, Andrew agreed. By the boy. They rode back in the last of the daylight. Andrew let 16 pick her own pace, and Justin held his gelding beside her again without seeming to think about it. The sky above the Wind River peaks turned the color of a bruise and then went black. Halfway home, Justin said, "You'll want to sleep before you go to Lander. I'll go in the morning. I'll go with you." Andrew did not answer that. He was not sure yet whether he wanted the young man beside him for what came next, and he was not sure yet why he was not sure. They parted at the fork below the cabin. Justin touched his hat. "Andrew, thank you. Don't thank a man before the work is finished." Justin smiled a little. Tiredly, my father used to say that. Andrew's hands closed on the reins. He kept his face still. "Did he said. Every time somebody in town wanted to shake his hand for something he hadn't quite done yet. Sounds like a careful man. He was. Justin looked off toward the dark line of the hills. He died 5 years ago. I still hear him, sometimes in the things I catch myself saying. Andrew nodded once. He did not trust his voice. Justin lifted his reins. Tomorrow then, first light. First light. The young sheriff turned his horse and rode north toward town. Andrew watched him until the sound of the hoofbeats faded into the dark, and then he watched a little longer, at nothing, because he could not yet bring himself to turn 16 toward the cabin. When he did, he rode home slowly. He unsaddled the mare in the dark and rubbed her down by feel. He carried her tack into the barn and hung it on the peg where it belonged. The ledger was still on the porch bench where he had left it. He had known it would be. No one came up this trail without him hearing. He sat down beside it. He did not open it. Above the ridgeline, the first stars had come out. He looked up at them for a long time. He slept badly, the way a man sleeps when the shape of a decision has entered the room but has not yet spoken. Twice he rose to look out the window. The stars had shifted, then shifted again. He put a fresh log on the fire he did not need and sat in the chair beside the hearth until the eastern sky began to gray. The ledger stayed on the porch bench. He did not bring it inside. He did not want to look at it under a lamp. At first light, he saddled 16. Justin was already at the fork of the trail waiting. A thermos of coffee across his saddle horn and steam still rising from the neck of it. He poured a cup for Andrew without asking. They rode to Lander with the sun climbing behind them. Bill Reeder's shop stood at the south end of town. A low log building with an iron roof and a corral of half a dozen horses waiting their turn. Reeder himself was inside, bent over the near forehoof of a big roan. He looked up when the door opened, saw Justin's badge, and set the hoof down. "Sheriff Bill," Justin lifted his hat. "We're looking for a horse you shoed since October. Front left, nail set crooked on the outside quarter." Reeder wiped his hands on his apron and looked at Andrew. "Whose work?" "Your boy's," Andrew said. Reeder's mouth tightened. He did not deny it. He walked to the back of the shop and opened a wooden box on a shelf and took down a ledger of his own, smaller, greasy at the corners. He turned pages with a thumb. Since October, front left, crooked nail. He read down the column. 4 horses, Miller's Sorrel, that paint of the Baxter girls. A gray gelding belonging to a man named Cross came through in February, and a bay stallion belonging to a surveyor out of Cheyenne, name of Harlan Reese, shoed the 12th of March. Andrew said, "The surveyor. Where's he now?" Reeder shrugged. "In and out. He's been working up the line for the railroad. Comes into Lander once a fortnight. Stays at the Grand." Justin thanked him. They walked out into the street. "Reese," Justin said. "He fits. City boots on the dead man. A surveyor would carry a chainman. If they quarreled over money or over what the chainman had seen, he'd want him quiet. He would." They found Harlan Reese by 2 o'clock that afternoon in the dining room of the Grand Hotel, eating a plate of ham with a napkin tucked into his collar. Justin arrested him at the table without raising his voice. Reese did not resist. He did not even seem surprised. He asked only for his coat. His bay stallion was in the livery. The crooked nail was still there, in the left front shoe. Justin pried it up with his own hand and held it flat on his palm and did not say anything for a long moment. They rode back east with Reese seated on the bay between them, his wrists loosely bound in front of him. He was a thin man of about 40, with pale eyes and a habit of licking his lower lip. He talked once, and only once, about halfway to town. "I thought I had another week," he said. Neither Andrew nor Justin answered him. They put him in the county jail before sundown. Justin locked the outer door himself and stood a moment with his hand on the bar, looking at nothing. Then he turned to Andrew. "Come to supper tonight." Andrew almost refused. The word was already forming in his mouth, shaped and ready, the way a man's refusals are ready when he has spent decades practicing them. He said, "I would be glad to." Justin nodded, as though the answer had never been in doubt, and told him the house was the white one on 3rd Street with the 2 young maples in front. 6 o'clock. His wife's name was Clara. She would set a 4th plate. "A 4th? My mother lives with us, since my father passed." Andrew nodded once. He did not ask her name. He rode home the long way along the river and left 16 to graze in the small paddock behind the cabin. He washed his face and his hands twice. He put on the good gray shirt he wore to funerals, because he owned no other shirt suitable for going into a white man's house at supper. And he combed his hair with water and stood a long moment in front of the small square of mirror above his washstand. An old man looked back at him. The old man's eyes were tired. He picked up the ledger from the porch bench on his way out. He did not know why. He told himself he did not know why. He wrapped it in an oilcloth and slid it into the saddlebag on 16's offside and buckled the strap and did not look at what he had done. Then he rode into town. The house on 3rd Street was small and neatly kept. 2 young maples, as promised, still bare-limbed against a lavender sky. A picket fence, whitewashed within the year. A lamp already burning in the front window. Clara Colton met him at the door. She was perhaps 28, dark-haired, and she took his hat with both hands as though it were a thing worth caring for. She smelled of bread and of the kind of soap women order out of catalogs. "Mr. Andrew, my husband has told me all about today." "Not all, I hope, ma'am." She smiled at him. It was a real smile. "Enough that I know you helped him do a hard thing well." She led him into the front room. A fire burned low in a stone hearth. On the mantel above it stood a clock, a pair of brass candlesticks, and a photograph in a dark wooden frame. Andrew saw the photograph before he saw the woman seated in the chair beside the fire. It was a picture of a man of about 40, standing beside a horse, a tall dun horse with a dark stripe down the spine. The man wore a long coat and a flat-brimmed hat and held the horse's rein loosely in his left hand. The horse was caught in the middle of a step. Its off hind foot was raised and turned slightly outward at the peculiar angle Andrew had watched cross a creek bed in the summer of 1878, moving away from a place where a Shoshone woman lay on the grass with her hair unbraided. He had written that angle down. He had written it down that same night in a shepherd's tent 9 miles east, by the light of a tin lantern with a cracked chimney. He had drawn a small sketch of the hoof, from memory, in the margin of the page. He had labeled it, "Rear off, turned outward at rest and at walk, a defect from birth or from a badly healed injury, unmistakable." The horse in the photograph was that horse. He stood very still in the doorway. "Mr. Andrew," the voice came from the chair beside the fire. He turned toward it slowly, because he did not trust his face yet, and because a man who has just seen a ghost owes the living the courtesy of composing himself before he speaks to them. The woman in the chair was small and white-haired and had been beautiful once. She was still beautiful in the way certain wooden things are beautiful after long weather. Her eyes were the same gray as her son's. She held out a hand to him without rising. "I am Margaret Colton. Justin has spoken of you many times, even before today." He took her hand. It was warm and dry and very light. "Ma'am, please sit. Clara will bring us something." He sat where she indicated, in a straight-back chair across the hearth from her. The fire was between them. The photograph was above it. He kept his eyes on Margaret Colton and did not look up. Justin came in from the kitchen carrying a decanter. He poured 3 small glasses of something amber and handed one to his mother and one to Andrew and kept one for himself. He raised his. "To a hard day finished." "To a hard day finished," Margaret said quietly. Andrew touched the rim of his glass to theirs. He did not drink yet. He waited until Justin sat down, and then he took the smallest sip a man could take without giving offense, and set the glass on the small table at his elbow. They spoke of the weather. They spoke of the road out to Andrew's cabin and whether the ford would flood this year. Margaret asked about 16 and seemed genuinely interested when Andrew told her the mare was 23. She said her own first horse had lived to 29 and that she had wept for a week when it died, and that she had been 44 years old at the time and was not ashamed of the weeping. Andrew smiled at that. He could not help it. He liked her. He had not expected to like her. Clara called them to the table. The dining room was small and lit by 2 lamps and a candle in the center of the cloth. There was a roast chicken and potatoes and a dish of stewed greens. Andrew ate carefully. He had not sat at a set table like this in many years. The forks were heavier than he remembered forks being. Halfway through the meal, Justin looked across at him. "Andrew, I wanted to ask you something, and I have been trying to find the right moment for it, and I think the moment is not going to come on its own." Andrew set down his fork. "Ask. You were a scout for the Army in the 70s. My father, Scott Colton, ran cattle out on the Big Sandy from 74 until he sold out and moved us into town in 86. I know some of the men who worked those years for him. I always wondered whether you and he had crossed paths." Margaret Colton was looking at her plate. Justin went on, gently, "My father died 5 years back. I was 29. I've been trying since I took this office to know the country he moved through, the men he knew. If you remember him at all, I would be grateful for anything you could tell me." The room was very quiet. The candle guttered once and steadied. Andrew looked at the photograph on the mantel through the open doorway. The horse's rear off hoof was still raised, still turned outward, still unmistakable. He looked back at Justin. "I remember him," he said. Justin's face changed. It was a small change, the way a lamp flame changes when a door opens somewhere else in the house. He leaned forward a little. "You did know him. I saw him. Once or twice. On the range. He rode a tall dun with a dark stripe down the spine." "Bill," Margaret said softly, without looking up. "He called that horse Bill. Scott called all his horses by men's names. He said it was to remind himself that a horse had as much sense as most of the men he did business with." She smiled a small, tired smile at her plate. Andrew held very still. "He was a good hand," he said. Because it was true, in the narrow sense in which it was true. Scott Colton had been a good hand with cattle and with horses and with the ordinary work of a ranch, and none of that had ever been the question. Justin nodded. Slowly, "Thank you. It's more than I've heard from most men who were out there in those years. They mostly say they don't remember. A lot of years have passed." "They have." Clara rose to clear the plates. Margaret excused herself and went to help her, and for a moment, Andrew and Justin were alone at the table with the candle between them. Justin turned his glass in his fingers. "He wasn't an easy man," he said, almost to himself. "My father. He was fair with me. He was fair with my mother. But there was something in him that never sat quiet. I used to hear him walking the porch at night, some nights, for hours. I asked him once what he was thinking about. He said a man's thoughts at 3 a.m. weren't fit conversation for a boy." Andrew looked at the candle. "I have known other men like that," he said. "Have you?" "A few." Justin nodded. He did not press it. He was, Andrew realized, a man who understood the shape of a silence and did not fill it with the wrong words. It was a rare quality in a young man. It was a rare quality in any man. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Justin said, "I asked because I wondered. That's all. I appreciate the answer. You are welcome to it." The women came back with coffee. Margaret set a cup at Andrew's elbow and touched his shoulder with 2 fingers as she passed. A light touch, the touch of a hostess, no more. And Andrew felt the touch travel down through his shoulder into the place where his ribs met, and stop there. She had not known. He was certain of it. Whatever her husband had walked the porch about at 3 a.m, he had not carried it back into the house. He had left it out on the boards under the stars. He had brought her only the daylight man. Andrew drank his coffee. It was very good coffee, better than any he made for himself, and he told her so, and she was pleased. He left a little after 9. Justin walked him out to the gate. The lamp in the front window still burned. The maples stood black against a sky full of stars. At the gate, Justin held the reins for him while he mounted. "Thank you for coming. Thank your wife for me. And your mother. I will." Andrew looked down at him from 16's back. The young sheriff's face was open and tired and honest in the lamplight. Andrew touched his hat. He said good night. He rode away. He did not go home. He rode to the north edge of town and then east along the wagon road, and when the town's last lamp had fallen behind the shoulder of a hill, he turned 16 off the road and up a low rise and stopped her at the top of it. The oilcloth bundle was still in the saddlebag. He had not touched it all evening. He had felt the weight of it every step of the way home from Justin's gate. He dismounted. He sat down on a flat stone near the crest of the rise and untied the bundle across his knees. The stars were very close. There was no moon. He did not need to read the pages. He knew what they said. He had written every line himself, in his own careful hand, in the years when his hand had still been steady enough for careful writing. He had numbered the entries from 1 to 13. Beside each number he had written a name, and beside each name a date, and beside each date a description of the killing, brief, without adjectives. The way a scout's report is written when the scout knows the report will one day be read by a man who was not there. Entry 4. Summer of 1878. A Shoshone woman found in a meadow above the Sweetwater, killed by a single shot to the throat. The killer had ridden away east on a tall dun horse with a peculiar defect in the right hind hoof, turned outward at rest and at walk. Andrew had followed the tracks for 9 miles, to the edge of a ranch on the Big Sandy, and had watched from a ridge as the rider unsaddled the horse in a corral behind a low log house. He had watched the man walk into the house without looking back. He had watched a woman come out onto the porch and hand the man a cup of something and touch his face with her free hand. He had written all of that down. He had not written down the woman on the porch. He had ridden away that night and had not returned. He had been 26 years old. He had told himself, riding back, that he would give the name to the sheriff in the morning. He had ridden into town at dawn and had found the sheriff drunk at his desk at 8 o'clock. And the sheriff had looked at Andrew and had said, "A Shoshone woman? On the Sweetwater? I have 3 white men shot dead on the Sandy this week, boy, and I am not riding after any man for a Shoshone woman on the Sweetwater. Get out of my office." Andrew had gotten out of the office. He had ridden home. He had written the entry that night in the ledger. In a shepherd's tent, 9 miles east of nowhere, by the light of a tin lantern with a cracked chimney. He had promised himself that night that he would keep writing. He had promised himself that he would keep every name in case a day ever came when a sheriff would want them. 3 sheriffs had come after that one. None of them had asked. The 4th sheriff was a young man with gray eyes who set a 4th plate at his table for an old Crow Scout, and whose father had been kind to his mother, and whose father had walked the porch at 3 in the morning for a reason his son had never learned. Andrew closed the ledger. He held it flat on his knees. He looked at the stars for a long time. He rode back into town before dawn. The lamp in the front window of the White House on 3rd Street had gone out. He tied 16 at the picket fence and stood a moment on the boards of the walk, and then he climbed the 2 low steps to the porch and set the oilcloth bundle down beside the door. He did not knock. He stood a moment more, looking at the door, and then he took a folded square of paper from his coat pocket and tucked it under the string of the bundle. On the paper he had written in his careful hand for Sheriff Colton. Read it alone. A. He rode home in the gray light. He did not sleep. He sat on the porch bench where the ledger had lain for 25 years and watched the sun come up over the ridge. 16 stood in the paddock and watched him back, as though she understood that some kind of long thing had ended and was waiting to see what came next. Justin rode up the trail a little after 4 in the afternoon. Andrew had known he would come. He had known also that he did not know in what shape the young man would arrive, angry or broken, or simply emptied out, or some 4th thing Andrew could not have named in advance. Justin dismounted at the corral. He did not tie the black gelding. He let the reins fall and walked to the porch, and Andrew saw as he came closer that the young sheriff had not slept either. His eyes were red-rimmed. He had shaved, though, and put on a clean shirt, and Andrew understood that the shirt and the shave were the things a man does when he has decided to keep walking through a day that has broken him. Justin climbed the porch steps. He did not sit. "I read it," he said. I know. All of it. Twice, yes. Justin was quiet a long time. He looked out across the yard, toward the willows along the creek that were just beginning to redden. My mother doesn't know. No, she loved him. I saw that last night. He loved her. I believe he did. Justin turned his head slowly and looked at Andrew. Why did you give it to me? Andrew set his hands flat on his knees. Because I am 71 years old, he said. And the 13 names in that book are the names of the ones who did the killing. But there are 13 other names that go with them. The names of the dead. Their families never heard those killers' names. Not one of them. I have carried this alone for 25 years, and I am the last man alive who knows. If I die tonight, they die with me a second time. Justin looked at his hands. You could have given it to a newspaper. I could have. Why didn't you? Because the newspaper would have printed the names and sold the papers and gone on to the next story. And the families would have read them in a language most of them do not read, and would have been told nothing more. Those names do not belong to a newspaper. They belong to the families. Justin nodded, slowly. There are letters, he said. In my attic. Boxes of them. My father wrote to my mother in the years before they married, from the range, in his own hand. Yes, his handwriting is on every page. Yes, Justin looked up. I know what to do, he said. He rode out the next morning with the ledger in one saddlebag and a bundle of his father's letters in the other. He was gone 6 weeks. He went first to the Crow, because the Crow were closest, and because Andrew had drawn him a map on the back of a feed store receipt of the families to visit, and the order in which to visit them. He rode to a lodge above the Little Bighorn and sat on the ground with an old woman whose daughter had been killed in the fall of 1881. And he laid his father's letter beside her hand and read her the name of the man who had done it, in English, and then waited while a grandson read it again, in Crow. The old woman did not weep. She looked at the letter for a long time. Then she folded it once and put it inside her dress and said, in English, bury it. He rode to the Shoshone next, to a small cabin above the Sweetwater, where the sister of a woman killed in 1878 still lived. She was 76. She read the name herself, in English, slowly, she said, publish. He rode to the Arapahoe. He rode to a boarding house in Rock Springs, where a Chinese woman kept the accounts, and had kept them for 22 years, since her husband had been shot at a rail camp for reasons no one in town could quite remember. He gave her the name. She said publish. He rode south to a small ranch outside Rollins, where 2 sisters kept goats, and remembered a brother who had ridden north in 1884 and had never come home. One sister said publish, and the other said bury, and they argued about it in Spanish for an hour at the kitchen table while Justin drank coffee, and in the end, they agreed to write to him when they had decided. They did, 6 weeks later. They said publish. 6 families said publish, 7 said bury. Justin honored every one. The names that were to be published, he took to the territorial paper in Cheyenne, along with his father's letters and the ledger and his own signed statement, and he asked the editor to print them together, without shortening, and to send a copy of the paper to each of the families. The editor did. He did not resign. He served out his term. He served a second one after that. He was fair, and he was slow to anger, and he was known in the country as a man who would ride a long way to bring a body home to the right door. His mother lived until 1911. He never told her. Andrew did not think he should have told her, and told him so once, and Justin nodded and did not answer. And the matter was never spoken of between them again. Andrew sat on his porch a year later, in the last light of an April evening, with a small stack of letters on the bench beside him. They had come from each of the 13 families in the months after Justin's ride. Some were short, some were long. Some were written in English, and some in other hands he could not read. But Justin had translated those for him and had written the translations on the backs. Andrew read them aloud to the wind, in Crow, one name at a time. He read them slowly. There was no hurry. The willows along the creek had gone red again. 16 stood in the paddock, 24 years old now, and listened without lifting her head. When he had finished the last name, he sat a long time in the dark. He was not, after all, the last witness.